Well, good afternoon. I'm Camilla Benbow, and I'm Dean of the Peabody College at Vanderbilt University, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to our 2024 Homecoming and Reunion. It's been fun to see across campus so many alums returning and exploring what used to be their old home. And I have an office that looks over to Peabody Green, and if the size of the tents are any indication, it sounds like you're going to have a wonderful evening ahead celebrating getting to know your old friends again. But down to business. This fall has been an exciting one for Vanderbilt, and not just because of our football team. The academic year marked as historic early on by the launch of the new Roberts Academy and Dyslexia Center. The Academy is a transitional school serving primary students and an interdisciplinary hub for scholars to advance groundbreaking dyslexia research. The Academy opened in its temporary location on Terrace Place in August with 21 third and fourth grade students. As you'll hear later, we are really thrilled about how things are going. It's really going well. Hal and Marjorie Roberts, whose philanthropy supports the Academy and Dyslexia Center, they believe strongly that it is possible to meet the learning needs of children with dyslexia and to change their educational journeys for the better. The faculty of Peabody College, of course, share their belief. You may know that Peabody has a reputation for having the #1 department of special education in the country. Yes, I like to brag about our #1 department, and I do it all the time. And the department includes all the faculty members on today's panel. To introduce them, let me first introduce Professor Joe Webby, who chairs the department and will serve as a moderator. Professor Webby earned his master's and his doctorate from Vanderbilt, and he has taught here since 1990. Joe studies children's behavioral disorders as well as reading and is an expert on intensive intervention. The Roberts Academy launch simply could not have happened without Joe's leadership and the endless, and I mean endless hours he and his team put into this effort. Thank you, Joe, for all that you have done. Where are you? There you are. Okay. And I would note that this event is also being live streamed and afterwards will be available on the Roberts Academy website. So if you want to go back and say, I want to hear this thing one more time, I didn't quite get it, you have the chance to do it. And those online, welcome. And now, please welcome Professor Joe Webby.
Thank you, Camilla. This is an exciting time for the college and for the university and for the department. And I think it's worth noting that the Roberts had no connection with Vanderbilt, zero connection. They came here because of the people that are on this panel and the work that we do at Peabody, and particularly in the Department of Special Education. And I could not be prouder to be a member of this department and get to admire the fine work that these individuals have. So we have a panel today, and what we're going to do is spend about 20 minutes, and with our faculty members, I'm going to ask them some questions to comment on some of the current issues in the area of dyslexia and reading intervention, and following that 20-minute conversation, then we'll turn over to our school director, Dr. Jared Clotfelter. He'll talk a little bit about how the opening of the new school has gone this year. We're in 10 weeks now, I think, and we've got some it's hard to say things have been life-changing in 10 weeks, but from some parents' perspectives, I think it has been life-changing for some of their children. So on the panel today, we will go with Dr. Jeannie Wanzek right here. Jeannie is the Curriculum Endowed Chair in Special Education, and she conducts research examining effective reading instructions and intervention, and she focuses on prevention and remediation for children with reading difficulties and disabilities. Next to her is Dr. Marcia Barnes. Dr. Barnes is a Dunn Family Chair in Psychoeducational Assessment and a professional special education. She conducts research on the cognitive processes associated with the difficulties in reading comprehension and mathematics in children with neurodevelopmental disorders and kids who are at risk for reading disabilities. She also does work in early mathematics and testing intervention and assessments in those areas. And next to her is Dr. Lori Cutting. Dr. Cutting is a Patricia and Rhodes Hart Professor of Special Education. These are really the best people in the country. And she also is the Associate Director of the Kennedy Center and is a member of the Vanderbilt Brain Institute. Dr. Cutting's work, her focus is on cognitive neuroscience learning, with a particular emphasis on reading disabilities, language, and executive function. So, again, this is why the Roberts chose Vanderbilt and Peabody to be the home of their academy and Dyslexia Center. And on the end is Dr. Jerry Clodfelter, who is the director of the inaugural director, and we're hoping very long-lasting director of the Roberts Academy here at Vanderbilt. So we're going to, they all deserve a woo, I promise you that. So I'm going to start off with some questions, and it's really kind of an opportunity for them to share some of what we currently know about dyslexia and interventions for children with dyslexia, and sort of where we want to go. And I think the connection I'd like to make is some of their answers are going to be, we know this, some of their answers are going to be, we're trying to research this, and I think you'll get a full picture of how the school is functioning based on the work that they've done, but also some of the work that will be going on in the research center when we're up and running there. So as I told you guys, I'm going to throw these questions out. I'll pick some people to answer, and Jeannie, I'm going to pick on you first to talk a little bit, and then we'll go from there. And don't forget to use your microphones. I think so. They are, yes. So Jeannie, can you talk a little bit about what the features of good reading instruction are for a student with dyslexia?
So dyslexia is generally defined as having particular difficulties with the sound structure of English and using that to read words, essentially. So to turn the English print into a language that can be understood, which is not a natural process the same way it is orally. So there can also be secondary consequences of that, such as lower reading vocabulary or reading comprehension difficulties from having spent some time not being able to access print. As a result, we see, in a general sense, that really good instruction addresses both of those areas. So addresses the foundational skills of turning that print into language, teaching about the sound structure of English very explicitly and targeted with good application of how to do that in a very systematic way, as well as word reading accurately and fluently and practice with that, and very targeted instruction in how to do that you might not see just in the general classroom of all types of readers. It should also include some of the secondary areas. So students who don't have dyslexia have had a lot more access to text, have probably done a lot more reading, and as a result, their reading vocabulary and their ability to analyze text has been growing, while a student with dyslexia couldn't access that more complex text. So more sophisticated types of vocabulary instruction and ways to analyze text so that once the print becomes easier for them and they are able to read that print, they're not then behind in some of these higher level types of skills. So we see those overall components of instruction, as well as the delivery of that instruction being very explicit, step-by-step, targeted, and as a result, we often see that being needed in small groups with a lot of additional practice and feedback that can be targeted to individual students.
Right. So to kind of follow up on that question, and this can be for you or for anybody else on the panel, I mean, we talk to a lot of families, and we talk about the explicit instruction that's required for children with dyslexia, and I guess often we're asked, why can't that instruction be provided in a typical public school? So if you're fair to comment on sort of, is it resources, is it training that may impact those sorts of things?
Well, from what I see in my work and as a teacher myself in public schools, it generally comes down to resources. Teachers and time are very valuable resources in all schools, and we know that it takes a very specialized and a lot of specialized teachers, because they need to be able to not only meet with small groups of students who have dyslexia to provide the most effective instruction that is individualized for them, but they need time to look at how those students are progressing, what that means for instruction tomorrow or next week or the following week, and how to plan for that instruction. And so I think overall, and longer interventions as well. So the time issue also goes to the students. A lot of times with the teacher shortage that we also have limited time that we can provide the intervention within a typical school schedule in a lot of ways. And so students who can receive very consistent, frequent, and a little bit longer than maybe goes on in a lot of schools intervention are going to be able to make more progress. We have a teacher shortage nationally, and that's overall, but it is particularly problematic with teachers who address the needs of students with disabilities, including dyslexia. And so that resource really keeps us from being able to provide the types of interventions nationally that we know these students need. I don't know if others have.
Anybody else want to? Thank
Yeah.
you. So, go ahead.
And just when you get to upper elementary and middle schools, the schedules are very different. And so there's even less opportunity for small group intervention. So that's a barrier that comes with how middle schools and secondary schools work.
So when you hear them talking, I just want to reiterate the process that before the school opened up, these are the individuals plus some others on our faculty, Douglas and Fuchs, who actually met with Jared and the assistant director, Sam Gessel, to talk about what works best for the school based on research. And when you hear Jared talk about the intensity of instruction at the school, you'll sort of pick up some of the pieces that Jeannie and Marcia's and others have talked about. So we're going to move on a little bit to sort of maybe the understanding why dyslexia occurs or where it occurs. And so I'm going to talk to Lori in her area of research here. So Lori, can you talk a little bit about what the role of genetics and neuroimaging play in identifying and assessing dyslexia, particularly dyslexia early?
Sure, I think so.
Okay.
This is a complicated question. I had to sort of digest it and think about it. And the reason for that is that we don't have like a specific gene that's associated with dyslexia. We know that it's highly heritable and that it runs through families, but it's not sort of this. We're not at this point where we're like, oh, this is the gene that we know that we can identify that this person will be at risk for dyslexia. But that being said, the fact that it does run through families and is heritable, I think, has really important implications for practice. So one of the things that is interesting to me is that a lot of the screeners, this is coming in a little bit more these days, but a lot of the screeners do not ask one simple question in terms of a pediatrician asking it, or a preschool teacher, or a kindergarten teacher. And that is, did anyone in your family struggle to learn how to read? And so that, I think, is very much informed by the genetic studies. And I think people are starting to put those questions in screeners, but I don't think they're in pediatrician screeners at this point in time. In terms of neuroimaging, I mean, we know that there's brain differences between individuals who have dyslexia versus those that do not. And probably most of you have seen some of those images and findings. But in terms of, like, has that actually translated into what we're going to do in the classroom? I would say no at this point. That is something that is sort of the brass ring for the future, in terms of knowing that this child has this type of profile when they're reading, and therefore they would benefit from this particular type of evidence-based instruction. I will say that I think there are studies that show that the brain changes when you give people intervention, the proper type of intervention, individuals' dyslexia. And I think that has a really important point in terms of highlighting the importance of instruction and how the brain does actually change with instruction. And I think it does something else important, which is conveying and confirming the power of the powers that teachers have to capitalize on brain plasticity, especially for when kids are young, right? And so teachers are really key to the environment in terms of shaping the brain over development, and I think those neuroimaging studies right now illustrate that. And the promise for neuroimaging in the future is that maybe we can find somebody, maybe we can find out that children are at risk, long before they're even trying to learn how to read or even talking. That's the really important key. I think we're getting to early screening a little bit later in the panel, but before kids are even talking, like very, very early on, could we understand that these brain patterns may lead to somebody who's at risk for dyslexia and therefore intervene very early on?
Anyone else want to add to that? No? Okay. Well, Lori, to pick up on that point, we hear that most children start being referred for identification or for assessment sometime around the late second grade, third grade. And so from a perspective of someone who was a parent and a teacher, that sort of, to me, translates this idea of there's 2 or 3 years of failure before they may get the instruction. And I think for parents who have children who struggle with learning, that's a critical time for children to create positive attitudes about going to school. And when you hear a first grader say, "I hate school," there's nothing more heartbreaking than that to me. So for Marcia and Lori and anyone else who wants to pop in, given that sort of this identification happens a little bit later in elementary school, are there any efforts to try to identify students earlier? And what do those things look like?
Yes, well, there's something called the wait to fail model, which is that dyslexia and other learning disabilities are not identified until 3rd grade at the earliest, and often into 4th and 5th grade. We also know that some of our best interventions are more powerful at younger ages than they are at older ages. And so that's why it was called the wait to fail model. But these days, based on a lot of research that was done over the past couple of decades, we do have the opportunity to have systems in place that are preventative, or meant to be preventative systems that catch kids early and then provide intensive intervention. And this is something that's sometimes referred to as multi-tiered systems of support. And part of that system involves something called universal early screening. And what that means is that everyone in kindergarten, let's say, and I also work at the pre-K level, so I would say it should start there as well, but from kindergarten on at least, all children in a classroom are provided with screening for reading and math difficulties, let's say, behavioral difficulties. And then many children will not need anything more than what they're already receiving from the general education teacher, but it's the opportunity to rapidly and responsibly place kids who seem to be at risk in early intervention. And, that might not look all that intensive, but if children are monitored with these rapid screening measures, a minute each, even if you have to do a couple to be reliable, you're really only spending 2 or 3 minutes per child. And the payoff is huge, as you can imagine, because you catch those kids before they fail. And so that's the system that the research said should be in place. And then children who are not responding to the best instruction have an opportunity to have more increased or more intensive instruction. So that's the model that we would like to be in all schools. It's there to lesser or more extents, depending on what school a child is in. But that is the main way that I would say we know from the research that it should work, so that we're not waiting for kids to fail.
And just connecting to that, to what we were talking about before, that is what Marcia was talking about is a really good example of how we do change over time. In the last 10 to 20 years, that has become much more commonplace in schools to not only screen and identify students much earlier, but to provide some of those early interventions. We are still then thwarted by some of the teacher shortage in terms of being able to provide all those interventions and the most effective, but 20 years ago, the time before that, that was not commonplace at all.
Well, I think picking up on something that Lori talked about in terms of knowing whether there's a familial history of reading difficulties is that there's also an appreciation for if a child is suspected of having a reading difficulty, that there are two other pieces that absolutely also need to be assessed with these rapid, short tests, and that is mathematics and attention. And because that group of difficulties tends to travel together. And so it's good to know early on. It increases one's ability to actually, again, grab those kids in your safety net before they fall through the cracks and to treat them in a holistic way that our children deserve.
Great. One of the best parts of my job is I get to see all the work that these guys are doing, and I get to see the grants they're submitting and those sorts of things. And what I see oftentimes is that they're collaborating with people from across the college and the university. And so I think this really, to me, signals this idea of what's the role of multidisciplinary research, why is it important for the field of dyslexia, and is that what's going to be the future of dyslexia in terms of dyslexia research, saying it's not just going to be educators, it's going to be neuroscientists, it's going to be psychologists, it's going to be pediatricians and those sorts of things. So can you guys speak a little bit about sort of the role of multidisciplinary research in advancing the field of dyslexia?
So I can start, I guess. So I would say that we're already here. It's not, that we're already doing it. And I was thinking as I was sitting on this panel and everybody was talking, I was thinking, the committee that helped with the Roberts Academy, we really represented so much multidisciplinary research right in and of itself, with our diverse backgrounds. And of course, in Joe's department, we have people that are from all different backgrounds and have all different scientific expertise. But I think it really will require and continue to require more and more interdisciplinary work to be able to understand both the biological and environmental and implementation of the science that we know should be implemented is going to require a broad array of expertise.
Can I ask you what your favorite discipline is?
My favorite discipline? Oh.
Special education.
Yes, special education.
Thank you very much
Sorry.
for that.
Special
I appreciate you answering that question.
But for me, I guess it's funny because when you ask that question, actually for me, that encompasses all this
Right.
that just that term encompasses. So I don't think of it as it's a thing that's separate.
No. And you're exactly right. The department represents a lot of different backgrounds and psychologists, educators, neuroscientists, and I think that's what makes our department so strong is that we have this diverse set of skill sets that come together and coalesce around important issues like dyslexia. So we talked a little bit about the idea of identification and early identification and the importance of early intervention. But since the dyslexia announcement came a year and a half ago, and we've been interacting with teachers and parents and the Roberts family and so forth, the question that kind of comes to mind in these arenas is, what about my child who's in the 5th grade or 6th grade or 7th grade, or adults who have dyslexia? And so the question I have is, what do we know about older adults who have dyslexia? What are the things that are being done? What needs to be done in that particular area? And I'll turn it over to Marcia for that one.
Yeah, so there's some really interesting research that's come out in the last few years, putting together intervention research from across many different research groups, and shows pretty convincingly that the effects of our reading, of our really strong reading interventions, our current ones, are largest for the youngest kids, and those effects start to decrease over grades, starting, I won't say an actual cut, but into middle grade. Some of our best word reading interventions are producing effects that are not as strong as we really want to see. So we know that now, and that's great. I think what we don't know is exactly what to do about it. But there are a number of groups across the country that are really working on trying to improve word reading and reading comprehension along with it for older students. And to give you a sense of the issue here, I just want to read to you a primary grade passage in science and then a middle school passage in science. And I'll preface it by saying in the primary passage, there are 4 sentences. They're short sentences. Listen for the common single-syllable words, repeated words, and very few 2-syllable words. The sun and 8 planets make up our solar system. The sun gives off heat and light. The planets move around the sun. They spin as they move. Now think about a child who can read that at about a grade 2 reading level, but has dyslexia, and they're in 6th grade. And we're asking them to read. I'm only going to read 1.5 sentences. Pay attention to longer sentences, multisyllable words, academic words, less common words. The world's greatest deserts were formed by natural processes interacting over long intervals of time. Paleodeserts, large sand seas, now inactive because they are stabilized by vegetation, extend well beyond the present margins of core deserts, ... I did not finish that sentence because it goes on. So you can see what some of the challenges are in terms of thinking about, how would we start to really try to improve in a rapid way word reading skills in older individuals. And we haven't cracked that code yet, but there are lots of really smart people working on it. So stay tuned.
Any questions from the audience right now based on what? Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. I serve on the board of the Skank School in Atlanta, Georgia, and the board of the College of Computing at Georgia Tech, which does not have the same football year that Vanderbilt has had. And so my question is about adults who are dyslexic and their ability to do what has become the essential 21st century skill of coding. And what do we know about the ability for dyslexics, remediated or not, to write lines of code?
Well, I'm actually doing a project with someone from computer science here, Yu Hang, and we are looking at that. And so she is doing studies with adults with dyslexia and teaching them to code. We're looking at eye movements in terms of what they're doing when they're coding, as well as reading, and sort of comparing those two things. We only have about 19 participants so far. So people are looking at that question, but I don't know the answer to it.
Yes.
How scientifically linked, if at all, is our proprioception challenges or changes to dyslexia? I'm just wondering if that is more of a in the myth bucket or in the truth bucket. And if no one wants to answer, that's okay.
Can you just say a little bit more about what you mean by the
Yes.
proprioception?
And other parents have also shared with me sometimes they have felt their children are maybe tend to be getting in like little clumsy accidents more. And then I also heard about for some there are proprioception challenges, and I could be mispronouncing that, but it's kind of the way our bodies move in space, right? So I just wondered
So there have been a lot of hypotheses about where dyslexia comes from and what is associated with it. And I would say what you're talking about is something where there are some children who have dyslexia who also have what is called in, I think more in Europe, discoordination kind of disorders. But there's no strong evidence that links the two of those in any causal way. There were some studies done, I think in the 70s or 80s maybe, where they tried to sort of retrain the motor system with the idea that if you could sort of catch kids up motorically and that they were less clumsy, that would affect their reading, and it didn't. So, you know, that's sort of the best kind of evidence we have, is if you can change something and something else changes, it probably means there's some kind of causal connection there. It could mean it. But I think those earlier studies suggest that those sorts of, that system is not related causally. But there may be some other difficulties that travel together with dyslexia, just like math difficulties do and attention disorders.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is that I haven't seen anything that, you know, suggests that those two are related or causally related. But as Marcia was talking about earlier, things like attention and self-regulation and those aspects often travel with dyslexia, and those things can also travel with things like not paying attention to where you're walking, or, you know, and so it's certainly possible that there are, you know, students who have, children who have both of those things going on.
Will the academy have anything to do with fine motor, gross motor? Will it address any of those things that co-present with dyslexia?
I think so. Jared?
I mean, so rarely, so I've been working in LD schools for about 10 years. So when I say LD schools, I mean schools specifically designed to serve students with learning disabilities. And very rarely have I seen a profile of a kid with just one diagnosis, right? So I think there's a lot of comorbidity that exists. I have seen quite often developmental coordination disorder alongside dyslexia or other disabilities. I'm not aware of the research connecting the two, or as far as being causal, but there certainly is amount of comorbidity just from my experience seeing it in practice.
I will say that there's some research going on where people are trying to understand some specific parts of the brain that are often associated with balance, but also some cognition as well. And so a part of the brain that people have sort of relatively ignored, the cerebellum. So I have to tell you that in most neuroimaging studies, the cerebellum is at the very sort of bottom of your brain, and most people cut off the cerebellum because you can't. No, they don't like actually cut it off. But we don't get images of it because that sounded really terrible. Maybe they can cut that part out, Joe. So of the tape, but because of the way the machinery works, you're not always able to get that part of the brain. But there are some studies going on where people are specifically focusing in on that part of the brain, and so that may reveal more as time goes on.
So again, we know more work to be done in this area. But I want to make the transition now, because all the work and the research that these guys have been talking about really is leading to one thing. How can we improve practice? How can we actually make a difference in the lives of children with dyslexia? And that's what the Academy is for. So the Academy's been open for about 10 weeks now. Jared's our inaugural director, and I just want to ask him a few questions and let him share with you about our story. And a little background, we have 21 students, third and fourth grade there. We're in 3 classrooms. We have 3 homeroom teachers, and we have 2 interventionists. So the students on average are getting this about 1 to 4 ratio of teachers. So they're getting lots of intensive instruction that these guys described. So Jared, just kind of kick things off. Without getting into the issue about unpacking furniture, what were some of the challenges we faced in getting the Academy off and running?
Challenges, it's hard. I don't remember any challenges, do you?
No, there was not a challenge at all.
Just kidding. So, starting any new endeavor, any new program, there's bound to be challenges. We're starting from scratch here, especially talking about starting a program that is as complex as a school is, right? My first thought as I think about the challenges was just the number of decisions that need to be made to start a school, right? Obviously, we came from a really strong position having this group and others within the special education department to inform decisions about curriculum and programming and the schedule, about the profiles of the students that we should be accepting. But still, there's still a lot there. And also, I think they would tell you, the research doesn't say, well, you need to pick this program, right? You should be using this specific intervention, especially considering at the time we were making those decisions, we were also going through the process of hiring our teachers while also simultaneously enrolling our first cohort of students, right? So at the time, we didn't know exactly who was going to be in front of us receiving this instruction, nor did we actually know specifically who would be delivering that instruction. I will say we really were very fortunate that we landed the right group of teachers with the right amount of training and expertise to come in, and we had the right group of students coming in, and obviously the right expertise in forming the decisions we make. So I feel like we came in a really strong place. However, there was a lot of uncertainty there. We've got the evidence, we've got the research to guide us in our decisions, but the reality is that no one has delivered those interventions or those programs in this specific setting or with these specific students. And also, no one has packaged these programs together in just the way that we were planning to package them together at Roberts Academy. So, a lot went into that, and that's not really even getting into, that's just the reading, writing, and math instruction, right? That's not getting into everything else that goes into a school, because early on in our conversations as a committee, it was important to everyone there that, yes, of course, first and foremost, we are going to deliver the highest quality reading, writing, and math instruction for our kids. And we want school to be an enjoyable experience for these kids. It is not going to be hours and hours of drill and kill, of sitting in a room and, boring the kids to tears. We wanted them to have a full school experience. And so, I think Joe alluded to our space that we moved into. If you're not familiar, we're in 2007 Terrace Place, which is the most beautiful building around. It is this 1904, I think, house that is on Vanderbilt's campus. We are very fortunate to have this beautiful space, but it's not a school. A lot of great work was done to retrofit it to make it a school, but it doesn't have a gym, I can tell you that, right? So how are we going to offer PE? How are we going to offer music? How are we going to offer drama? How are we going to offer these students a full school experience in addition to giving them that high quality instruction? And fortunately, that's where we could lean on the Vanderbilt community, the Peabody community. Our students are going to PE at the rec center, taking the Vandy vans over across campus to do that. We've also got some great external community partners that have come in, like National Children's Theater has partnered with us to come in and do drama, because obviously with 21 kids, we don't have the need for a full-time drama teacher. Joe actually had a former art teacher working on one of his research projects, she's coming over and teaching art with us, and so this is where the challenges were certainly there, but we were really able to lean on the Vanderbilt community to help us out through those.
Yes, we have. It's been a great partnership already. So I know it's been 10 weeks, 11 weeks, whatever, but do you feel like there's some successes? We talk all the time. I go to several meetings. I've been to several parent meetings, and the parents are very, just their expression of gratitude. So can you talk a little about, from your perspective, what are the successes that the school is showing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I think about where we are and what we've accomplished through just a little bit over the first quarter of the school year, we've definitely had some successes, and I'd probably put them in two buckets here. One, no surprise, as I sit up here next to a bunch of scientists and researchers, that we are a data-driven school, right? So we are keeping a close eye on our kids' performance from an objective standpoint. right? We set end-of-the-year goals for our students, and we track them regularly on how they're doing, making sure that they're on progress toward achieving those goals. And when they're not, maybe looking at how to adjust our instruction and our approach to make sure we get them back on track and that we're reaching those end-of-the-year goals. And the data is strong so far. I would say that we're still at a point where I would call it preliminary data, but it is trending in the right direction for our kids, and we're seeing some real growth. We're seeing some evidence that the program we've designed is working for our kids. And that is obviously crucial. That is really important as we think about, I don't know if we've talked about it explicitly, but we are a transition school. So the idea is not that we're going to add a middle school and a high school and try and retain kids as long as we can. The idea is that they're going to come to us, get this really intensive intervention, build up their skills, and be able to successfully transition to a more traditional school setting. And so with that, we want to make sure we are focusing on that, making sure we're getting them toward grade level performance. The other bucket that I would say 10 weeks into the inaugural year is really, I would say, just as important, if not more important, is how our kids are feeling about school. You know, I told you I've been in the LD schools for about 10 years. Families don't usually come to an LD school, a school like Roberts Academy, because their kid was thriving, right? They probably weren't having a really great school experience. We've got 3rd and 4th graders. They've been in school for a few years. And for most of them, school has not been enjoyable. It has not been fun. It's not been a place where they felt successful. And I would say our greatest success to this point at Roberts Academy is that our kids are feeling that way. As Joe alluded to, our parents are telling us that for the first time, their kids are telling them they enjoy school. I think one of the greatest markers of success is we have had multiple parents tell me, for the first time ever, when my kid gets in the car, they talk to me about their day. They tell me what they were learning in school, and that has never happened before. And I think there's a lot of reasons that go into that. One, being in the community of people like me, right? Having peers who have the same challenges that I have, being in a place where all of the teachers see me for who I am. They see past my deficits. They see my strengths. They're teachers who want to work with kids with my challenges. I think that even if we don't necessarily talk about that explicitly with kids, they feel it. And it leads into a culture within our school where our kids feel like they really do belong there. And I think one parent, really summed it up quite nicely. She was telling me, she said, you know, my son's in 4th grade. He's never liked school before, but he really does like it here. And she said, you know what, I think he feels seen. And so, you know, as I think about what our long-term success will be, and, you know, as we really try to focus on making sure that data is there, that our outcomes are there, and that our kids are making academic progress, I'm confident that, you know, coming from the starting place of, you know, these programs, these interventions that are research-based, that are evidence-based, if we can keep the path, you know, stay strong with those and maintain that culture where our kids come and they feel successful, they feel like they belong, they feel seen, the success will only continue to come and will only build.
So I want to add one thing that we've talked about, and because it's homecoming and alumni weekend, they love being at Vanderbilt. They love being at Vanderbilt, and they see themselves as part of the Vanderbilt community. And I think we often talk about how to fit a school into the university system, but they take great pride in being here. And I think we've had one student, he's already told us that he's going to go as far as he can as Roberts. He's going to go to Vanderbilt for his degree. He's going to come back and be a reading specialist at Roberts Academy. So we're creating the new generation of Vanderbilt alumni, I hope so. So lastly, Jerry, just kind of longer term goals, what do you see in terms of where we're going to go?
Yeah. Well, when I was interviewing for the position and learning about Roberts, I think the charge was that we would build the best school for dyslexia in the world. And I know we've got some stiff competition out there. I know there's some other great LD schools out there. And you know, when I heard that, I'm a Vanderbilt alum, I'm a Peabody alum. You know, every school is going to say that, right? It's don't be cliche in your mission, but nobody's going to say we want to be a really mediocre school, right? Like everybody sets their aim at being the best and being a great school. But I knew coming in that if Vanderbilt's saying that, if Peabody's saying that, if they're getting behind it, they probably mean it, right? So I mean, success is, for me, as I think about what Roberts can be, I don't want to sound cliche, but the possibilities really are limitless here. We've got the world's leading researchers informing what we're doing. We've got a great team of teachers. We've got this wonderful community of Vanderbilt that has gotten so far behind. Roberts Academy is doing everything they can to support us. the sky really is the limit for what we can do. And as I think about my role within this, it's really making sure that every single student who walks through our door is being served. So as I think about success, it's that when kids leave Roberts, that they're transitioning successfully, that when they leave us, they have those skills, they have the confidence to continue to really thrive, not just at Roberts, but outside of Roberts and when they leave us. And I also know that as the center gets up and running, that relationship between the academy and the center is going to be so important for extending our reach beyond the walls of Roberts Academy. You know, right now I am singularly focused on making sure we have the best possible program for those 21 kids and their families who are in front of us. And I also hope that as we build and as we grow, the reach really extends well beyond what we're doing just at Roberts, that we can have an impact on the field of dyslexia research and on the field of dyslexia education.
Great. So just to wrap, I do want to thank the Skank School. We did visit, there's a fantastic, and that's the Skank School actually was the inspiration for the Roberts to start their academy. So there is a great community of schools out there that I think in the future, hopefully we play a role in sort of bringing those academies together as a whole to really create a broader change in the field of dyslexia as well too. So I will wrap up our program here and to thank our panelists for their great answers and their wonderful insight on the field of dyslexia. I also wanted to thank Camilla Benbow for her support of this initiative. As chair of the department, it's never good when you get a phone call and a text and an email from your dean in 5 minutes. And that's how this kicked off. I think David Chambliss got a phone call, and then he told Camilla, and then I thought I was in trouble, and suddenly my path was set for the next 18 months of what I've been doing. But it's been, I'm a Peabody graduate, I'm a Vanderbilt graduate, and I've been here, as Camilla said, for a very long time, and I think this is going to be one of the best things that come out of that this university and this college is going to do. So I hope that you guys can follow our journey via the website, via the stories, come visit the school. We're always welcome, and in 2026, we'll be opening our new facility for 144 students. And Jared and I picked out the furniture today, so if you like the furniture, you can do it. But yeah, please come visit, please ask any questions. If you have any questions now, we have a few minutes to ask any questions. Yes?
How were the students chosen?
That's a great question. So a fairly typical admissions process. So families applied, then we screened students. Our panel here, they helped guide that process in deciding which assessments we would give to screen them to make sure that they were a good fit for the program that we were building. Not all of our students have a diagnosis of dyslexia. Some of that may be because of a lack of an assessment, but they had at least characteristics of dyslexia. And yeah, so we screened those students. A number of our students did come in with psychoeducational evaluations, so we took that into account, took references from their current schools, and then made a decision from there on who we thought we would best be able to serve.
Do y'all see yourselves, I mean, it's very early to say this, but once you open your center and get that up and running, do y'all see yourselves trying to create a model then that would be utilized in different areas of the country? Or do you see yourselves growing outside of Vanderbilt?
Did you talk to Mr. Roberts? We think this is a model that is portable, and I think in some ways, and actually the Roberts were here for a kickoff, and I got to ride back to the airport, and I think the Roberts family is interested in how we want to think about replicating this model, and they believe very greatly into this connection between universities and schools. They think that that's really, that connection, so there are 2 other Roberts Academies associated with universities and colleges, and that's what they see. So he was asking me, what about a satellite campus at, Austin Peay or somewhere? Because they really see that as the important model. So I think we kind of do that evaluation as we're going on. We'll have the center. I think the center, as Jared said, is going to really have a big say in what that looks like. Yeah, when the school's built and we get going, I think it's going to be an interesting thing to try to, we want people to replicate what we're doing. So. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, thank you for your attendance and your great participation, and go Vandy. All right, thank you.